All right, thank you. So yes, I'm Sharon Clough. I work for Cotswold Archaeology. Have done for about the last 9 years, but I've been in commercial archaeology for a lot longer than that. And I just wanted to talk about how sometimes we don't need to have these really big projects with thousands and thousands of skeletons. It's not all about the big numbers. Sometimes it can be something, a fairly unassuming, very small little watching brief that can become a really interesting project. Hence the title, Good Things Come in Small Packages. So the site is in Malmesbury, and I don't know if you all know where Malmesbury is. It's over in the west. It's sort of between Swindon, Bristol, Cirencester, is sort of in the middle there, and it's a lovely little old town. It's particularly famous if you've ever heard of King Athelstan. So they love him so much, they've actually named the local museum after him, the Athelstan Museum. And he's famous because he was the first king of all England, and he's buried in Malmesbury. They don't actually know where, but there is a lovely tomb for him. He died about 939 AD. It's also famous because of the abbey there, Malmesbury Abbey, built in about the 12th century. And it was in existence till the dissolution. It was a Benedictine monastery. So why am I telling you all this? Because it's quite important because of where our little excavation was. And this was right next to the extant Abbey buildings, and it was in the Old Bell pub, which is a Grade 1 listed building. And this bit at the front there, I think actually dates back to the time of the Abbey. So it's very, very old. Yeah, just really quickly recap about where Malmesbury is. So yes, King Athelstan and the Abbey. And then this is the bell here. You can see it's right next to the Abbey. It's a very, very close location. So we were in the back of the pub building, and you can see it's quite a tight space there. They want to do a single story extension onto the back, and to limit the impact on the fact that this is all, quite important bit of land. The design was to do 7 very small trenches rather than a big open plan excavation. So just for the foundation pads of the building. And you can see the spray line there. You can see just how small some of these areas are. Let's see if this is working. Excellent. So here is our excavation in the red line there. That's where it was, and the little green blobs are the little trenches that we were doing. And the big green building, I don't know if you can see my pointer, I don't know if that's working. That's the upstanding Abbey buildings, and then you've got the geophysics behind. So why did we not expect any burials here? Well, we actually know where most of the burials are and are supposed to be. So they're all south of the main Abbey building there, in the big sort of graveyard associated. But we also found some earlier excavations that have been done in the area on a site that Cotswold Archaeology actually did in 2002, where there was an old cinema demolished. And they found some burials there dating to the 12th and 13th century. And that's the number MW13672 that's on the screen. I won't try and use the pointer in case everyone can't see it. So we knew there were burials in that area. We also, some other burials have been found further south of this in the marketplace, which is the little dot right down at the bottom. And they've been dated to the 10th century and might relate to an earlier church, which is also down the bottom there. So we were just not expecting any burials at all, given the location of where this is. It's actually just to the side there of the cloister area. And again, I say you wouldn't expect necessarily, based on the 12th century layout, for there to be any burials in this location. Yeah, so there's just some more pictures, beautiful pictures. And again, I say it's not with the site of the kitchen possibly being up there. So here we did actually find some burials in 2 of our trenches. So the little red line and the little blobs on the screen there are our trenches 1 and 4. We actually had to extend trench 1 there to sort of get the extent of the burials. And we did find a bit of disarticulated bone in a couple of the other trenches as well. So these are very, very small little holes, but actually we got quite a lot of burials. So trench 1 had 11 sets of articulated skeletal remains, and trench 4 had 13. And these were all quite intercutting. There was lots of things going on, lots of different sort of layers. So there's obviously bone burial going on over a considerable amount of time. So this is one of them here, and you can see it's going under one of the walls. So we had a series of walls all over the place. So we knew the burials were earlier than these walls, but obviously we didn't know what the date was of the walls. So we had no finds. There was nothing to date. So radiocarbon dating really was the only answer to try and figure out why we've got these burials where they are. And here's another picture of just how small these little interventions are. They're just a couple of meters wide and quite deep. And I say all these burials were clearly earlier than these later walls. So the great thing about radiocarbon dating is because of the intercutting that we had in the stratigraphy, we could actually narrow down the date range. So if you date the burial at the bottom and the one at the top and possibly one in between, you can try and narrow that date range down because there is particular problems on the calibration curve for different periods. It's just another skeleton showing the intercutting. You can see it's cutting through a later, earlier grave there. We did have skeletons. These 4 little neonates were all in a row. You can just about see this crania there. The preservation wasn't brilliant, but these have obviously been interred at a very similar time, if not at the same time, in a row, so they don't actually have any relationship between them. And that's just another one. So we had a look at the stratigraphy, and as I say, we picked out 2 from each trench to do some radiocarbon dating. One would be one at the beginning of the sequence, one at the end of the sequence, in order to try and understand the range of the dates that was going on for these burials. So while we're waiting for the radiocarbon dates to come back, obviously I had a look at these skeletal remains and what is this sort of very small assemblage that we've got. And as I say, there was a lot of disarticulated bone and a lot of charnel, and that's all recorded separately. But what we did notice is that when you looked at the ages for all these individuals, over half are actually non-adult. In fact, they're all under about 12. So you've got a huge number of neonates and children in these little tiny areas and very few adults. And this was quite interesting. Does this mean anything particular, or is it just a sort of coincidence that we're looking at these 2 very tiny windows into a cemetery? So anyway, when the radiocarbon dates came back, oh, sorry, that's just another picture. They came back as 7th to 9th century. So this is amazing because this means that the dates are earlier than the 12th century abbey, and they possibly relate to the earliest use of the site for a monastery. So we have documentary evidence suggesting that in the 7th century, a monastic school was founded in Malmesbury about 640, which then apparently thrived and then became an abbey about 676 under the leadership of Aldhelm. He was known to be the nephew of Inner, King of Wessex. So this could be incredibly significant. And then by the 10th century, the Benedictine monastery became established and went on to that 12th century one that's still upstanding today. So our date range looks like it fits with that early monastic school that was founded there. But the date ranges are quite wide because at this time period, sometimes when they end up on the curve there, they end up on a plateau and it widens the date. The dates are even wider, however, because unfortunately we did 2 of the adults and they had they had fish in their diet, so they had to be calibrated on the marine calibration curve. So this is applied when the carbon and nitrogen results go beyond the terrestrial range. So regular consumption of marine fish will affect your radiocarbon date because it's old carbon. So if you think that the diet contains a percentage of this, the calibrated date needs to be adjusted by that percentage. And what it tends to do is just widen the date range. This is problematic in periods where fish is a large part of the diet. You get this in the Roman period because they loved their fish sauce and oysters and stuff, but it's particularly prevalent in the medieval period due to all the dietary restrictions for all the various religious reasons. Fish became very popular to replace meat. So when you're trying to tie in a burial to a known historic event like we are now, this wide date can be quite problematic. So what we decided to do was do a second stage of dates, but this time we're going to exclude the adults and we're only going to use the children who didn't have any marine in their diets. So we've sent off for a second load of dates and also again using the stratigraphy. And hopefully this method will narrow down that range so we can then place it into the historical narrative a little bit better to understand when these burials actually fit in to the various known events. But what also is quite interesting is, do these burials represent a lay cemetery of the early abbey, or or is this just something, just a sort of random grouping for some other reason? And how do all these non-adults fit in? So we know the zoning of babies and young children. For example, in the so-called eavesdrop burials, a lot of research has been done by Lizzie Craig Actons. And throughout early Christian England, this seems to be happening in about the 7th to 12th centuries. Infant burials are often found clustered around the walls of churches. And the suggestion is that placing these burials under the eaves of the churches is hoping that the rainwater will then fall onto their graves and posthumous baptism. And the highlight, the sort of fine example of this is at Rowan's Fennells in Northamptonshire. However, this might not actually be the reason infants are placed in these locations. We know in the Roman period, for instance, you really commonly find infants and neonates close to in and under buildings. So it just could be a continuation of a practice. So is it that our little cluster of children here, is it because we've just chanced on the location of some early abbey buildings to which these burials lie adjacent? That's one possibility. Or Duncan Sayre, for instance, has also looked at this phenomenon in churchyards in the same period, and he's noticed there's a lot more children in the churchyards than the field cemeteries for these dates. And he argues that perhaps it's more of a cultural reason, reflecting the actual mortality rate at the time, and it's got nothing to do with having this posthumous baptism. So, there could be lots of reasons why, and it's very difficult, as I say, when you're looking at these tiny little sort of keyhole surgery almost into a cemetery. Now, unfortunately, I was hoping to present the results of the second lot of radiocarbon dates. They are literally due any day. SUIP's running a little bit behind schedule, sadly. But as I say, hopefully they will narrow down the date range a bit more, and then I'll be able to sort of tell you exactly, well, not exactly, but within a much narrower date range when these burials went in. But I'm really hoping that I've been able to demonstrate that even the smallest excavation where you find burials, although this is not the smallest hole I've ever seen with a burial in it, can yield very big results, and that careful planning and use of the science can also lead to surprising results. And I think it's really important that we as commercial osteologists lead on sample selection to help interpret the results. And using a two-stage process for radiocarbon dating can be a really good strategy, because it gives you a chance to consider and rethink before destroying quite a limited resource. And I think more of us out there really need to learn a lot more about radiocarbon dating and how to use it strategically. So, as I say, hopefully I will come back with the results at some point. It's literally during the next 2 weeks. And yeah, these burials are earlier thinking Athelstan, and I say hopefully relate to the early Malmesbury Abbey, the earliest Malmesbury Abbey. And we've now established that these are the earliest residents of Malmesbury, sometime between 7th and 9th century AD. So, thank you.